Change it up for a second here, if that's okay. This is a special maftir reading. I wanted to just take a closer look, a little bit of a study of the maftir reading that we did and study it together. So don't put your chumash away before the haftarah, and I'll ask you to turn to page 421 in the chumash first. Actually, starting on 420, which is Exodus 17, verse 8. So here in our congregation, as we mark Shabbat Zachor, which is the Sabbath of remembrance, in which we recall the acts of Amalek, who we will read is considered pure hatred and true evil. Our Torah was lifted by the child of Holocaust survivors. Our Torah scroll was wrapped by a Holocaust survivor. We bless the birthday of a 95-year-old Holocaust survivor. Those who have survived some of the darkest days, some of the most evil hatred. And even some have called the Nazis themselves Amalek, pure evil. Let's take a little break in our service and read about who Amalek is and see if indeed Amalek is still alive in our world today. And so I'll ask you to read with me. You don't have a source sheet and we're not going to pass the mic around, but I wanted to take a look at the two places in the Torah where Amalek is mentioned so that we can get a deeper understanding of who Amalek is and what makes them who they are. So you may have already read the maftir, which we read. We're going to take a look. That's from Deuteronomy, but our first meeting with Amalek is right here. So again, we're on page 420 at the bottom, verse 8. Amalek came and fought with Israel at Rephidim. Moses said to Joshua, "Pick some men for us and go out and do battle with Amalek. Tomorrow I will station myself on the top of the hill with the rod of God in my hand." Joshua did as Moses told him and fought with Amalek, while Moses, Aaron, and Hur went up to the top of the hill. Then whenever Moses held up his hand, Israel prevailed, but whenever he let his hand down, Amalek prevailed. But Moses' hands grew heavy, so they took a stone and put it under him as he sat on it, while Aaron and Hur, one on each side, supported his hands. Thus his hands remained steady until the sun set, and Joshua overwhelmed the people of Amalek with the sword. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Inscribe this in a document as a reminder. Read it aloud to Joshua. I will utterly blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven." And Moses built an altar, named it Adonai Nisi. He said it means, "Hand upon the throne of the Lord." The Lord will be at war with Amalek throughout the ages, Midor Vador. So what did Amalek do? What did Amalek do? According to this reading, what we read in our Parsha, what did they do? They attacked the Jewish people. You say from behind, does it say that here? We're going to read that later in Deuteronomy, but this is our first mention and first meeting of this tribe. The Amalekites were a tribe that lived around Canaan, in Canaan, right, somewhere in the area where the Israelites were. What immediately happened? This is Parshat Bashalach. Every year when we read Bashalach, it is a highlight moment in our congregation because that is the portion in which we read the splitting of the sea and the Israelites' exodus from Egypt, freedom from slavery. This is the first battle with the tribe after our freedom, which God brought us, the Passover story, right? The Israelites were on a high. They had just escaped Pharaoh, escaped slavery with God's help, with Moses with the staff in his hand. There's one incident that happens in between, which is the Israelites are thirsty. They are thirsting at this place called Rephidim, which can mean weakness or sickness. And there, they get water by Moses striking a rock. Right? So here the staff is used in different ways to help the Jewish people. So what did Amalek do according to this reading? We're going to look at Nancy's reading in a second. But here it is just that, it seems, you can correct me, the Israelites were making their way, escaping Egypt, and they were attacked. And we have this strange story about Moses holding his hands up and other people helping his hands up. And when the hands were up, Israel would win the fight. And when their hands were down, the enemy would win the fight, right? And Israel prevailed because one person held each of Moses' hands up. Anything else we take from this? Anything else interesting? What? We work together, right? Definitely, right? This is not just one leader making one decision, right? This is a united front, right? And that everyone was inspired, sharing leadership, right? This is one of those portions where we talk about delegating and, right, different strengths coming together to unite, yes? Okay, so there is an apparent contradiction that's being brought up, which is the last two verses that we read, or 14 and 16. 14 says, I will utter, this is God speak. God is speaking here, by the way, right? I will utterly blot out Amalek and the memory of Amalek from under heaven. So it seems like I'm going to make sure Amalek disappears, never to be heard from again. And then the last verse is, God will be at war with Amalek for eternity, right? So if God's going to wipe out Amalek, how come this battle still rages on, right? One would think God could take care of these things, correct? Yeah. There's nothing here in the text that says what Amalek did other than attacking the Jewish people as they fled Egypt. And remember, God had the protective cloud already, right? We had the pillar of fire guiding them, right? How do you think the Israelites felt when they left Egypt with God protecting them? Were they on a high? Yes, right? So not soon after being on this incredible high, they're attacked. And if you understand the rabbis and the midrashim, there's an idea that actually all the surrounding tribes were fearful of the Israelites at that moment, right? They toppled the Egyptian empire, right? And there was an idea even that every single body of water around the world split at the same time that the Sea of Reeds split, right? It was a sign that God was protecting the Jewish people, and don't touch them, right? They have some special protection from God, and Amalek crushed that, right? So it's not that Amalek necessarily attacked the weak, as Nancy said, which we'll read as in Deuteronomy, but it's the idea that we thought we were invincible, right? Yes, Sherry. Of what? Say that again. So Sherry's now talking about this image of Moses and the hands up, right, with the rod, right? And it is that Moses is asking God to help the Jewish people, right? Similar perhaps to when Moses holds his staff aloft at the Sea of Reeds. And in fact, the rabbis are trying to understand this, and they actually say that when Moses held his hands aloft with the help and the rod was up, that the Jewish people fighting, the fighters, right, that their eyes went up to heaven and understood their heavenly mission, and that God would protect them, and then that's when they fought well, that's when they would win. But when the hands were down, they sort of lost faith, and they didn't feel the inspiration. So let's take a look at the second reading. So keep a finger there, put your Shabbat handout there on that page. Turn to page 1135. 11:35. Right at the bottom, 17. Remember what Amalek did to you? Are you there? I'll give you another minute. Zachor. This is where Parshat Zachor comes from. Our maftir. Zachor. Remember what Amalek did to you on your journey after you left Egypt. How undeterred by fear of God, Amalek surprised you on the march when you were famished and weary, cut down all the stragglers on your rear. Therefore, when the Lord your God grants you safety from all your enemies around you in the land that the Lord your God is giving you as a hereditary portion, you shall blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven. Do not forget. Is this the same? Is this the same quote as we had before from Exodus, or is Deuteronomy different? Number one, it's shorter. This is just 3 verses. Number 2, is it the same story? Do sometimes we retell things different ways? Or we get different details when we tell a story a second time? Right, so there's different details, right? Here we get a little bit more about how and who Amalek attacked, right? Amalek attacked the weak, and we were weak, right? We were famished, right? We were famished, and Amalek attacked the stragglers, the weakest part of our community, the flank, right? Those, if you can imagine, there were, depending on the count, 1 million, 2 million Israelites who had fled Egypt, right? Some of them were strong and fast marchers, and some of them had mobility issues, right? Some of them couldn't walk well or walk fast, right? And they were making their way very slowly. Doesn't say anything here about the protective thing. But here, Amalek is considered evil, immoral, brutal, harsh, because of who they attacked. Anything else different here? Yeah, who's blotting out? Right, different than in Exodus, it says, God, I will blot out the memory of Amalek. Here, as Shazzy said, it is a commandment for the Jewish people to blot out. How do we do that, by the way? We do it. We're going to do it in about 6-7 hours, maybe a little more. 9 hours. With our groggers, right? When we say Haman, who is a descendant. We're going to chant in the Haftarah. Amanda will, in a few minutes, that Haman is a descendant of Agag, who is a descendant of Amalek, right? When we say Haman, we literally blot out Haman's name. We blot out Amalek, right? With our groggers. Anything else different? Yeah. It's a great question, right? And this is where I wanted to sort of wrap up this little session. So Shira asks, right, do we ever fully blot out? I'm sort of now taking what you said, right? It seems to be a recurring thing that happens, right? Evil rises up that attacks the Jewish people, right? And it's this constant cycle of blotting them out, erasing them, and then someone else rises up. So, by the way, just to let you know, if you look at the previous verses in the Deuteronomy one, which we read for Maftir, it's a series of unethical business laws. It is that you should be honest in all of your dealings, right? And here, as Nancy said and others pointed out, this section focuses on the immorality of Amalek, right? In a section that deals with immorality and dishonesty and a punishment for ethical violations. So my friend and colleague from Hadar, Rabbi Shai Held, writes in his commentary, The Heart of Torah, should we be appalled by the savage offensive of Amalek against Israel and the Jewish people, and that the Torah considers Amalek a perpetual enemy of both God and Jews? While Amalek's behavior is undoubtedly abhorrent, There's something worrying about the depth and duration of this prescribed hatred. By mandating the Jewish people to kill every last Amalekite, does the Torah run the risk of inculcating in Israel the very cruelty that it detests? To read the Torah's troubling charge to wipe out Amalek is of necessity to struggle with it. Why is Egypt and Edom not hated or reviled in the same way? By the way, when I was at Hadar a couple weeks ago in New York City, we had an entire class which is an Amalekite allowed to convert to Judaism? It's a bit of a thought experiment. Have you ever met an Amalekite walking down the road? Right? If you meet an Amalekite walking down the road, what are you supposed to do to them? They're not supposed to live, right? So the rabbis aren't even asking that. They're asking, can an Amalekite join the Jewish people? It's an interesting thought question. So where Amalek is cruel and barbarous, the Jewish people are commanded to build a society in which the weak and defenseless are cared for, right? That which Amalek attacked the most is that which we are supposed to build up and protect the most. Israel disdains Amalek for what Amalek attacks and stands for. The rabbis grapple this idea. Is Amalek a monster that is eternal, that appears every generation? Or does Amalek even have the ability to change and transform, to do tshuva, to grow, to convert, to join the Jewish people? And in fact, if you read in the Gemara, they talk about Haman's grandchildren became rabbis. I don't know if it's true, but the Gemara actually says that Haman's grandchildren taught Torah in a yeshiva.
I did not read that.
It's in the Gemara. I can give you the source later. Trust me. So when we label someone Amalek, we run the risk of giving ourselves license to behave in savage ways, to root out savagery. In the process, we could become the very thing that we try to combat. Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev teaches that Amalek exists in the evil potential within every person and even ourselves. When I was at Hadar a couple weeks ago, one of my teachers, Rav Avital Hachstein, who runs Israel's Hadar Institute in Jerusalem, who has a child who is in combat in the IDF, and another child who is training to be one of those experts in tunnel explosives. This is what she shared with us. What is the goal of war? Is it simply to fight evil, or is it to ensure that we can live in peace? Hamas attacked the periphery of Israel, the border towns, the poorest places among the nation, the country of Eretz Yisrael, Medinat Yisrael. They taught us that we need to strengthen our own society, not simply to fight evil and seek revenge, but also to strengthen our own border towns. We can't just focus on ruining, but also building. Life is complicated. When Amalek attacks the weak, we also have to remember how we can raise up the weak and protect our own society. May there be peace. May there never be Amalek in our society. May we remember the hatred that existed, but also remember that we have to take care of the weakest within our own community and our own society. And now, Shabbat Shalom. Amanda will now chant the special Haftarah, which tells of the Agagite king and King Saul not following that command to kill all the Amalekites, which then leads to his descendant Haman, and we know the rest of the story.